Brent is one of my all-time favorite leaders of learning strategies and innovation. He is a leader at Shell, and he drives Shell's aspiration to be a world-leading learning organization. Over his career, Brent has led many of Shell's most critical global transformation initiatives of the 21st century. Initiatives that have collectively positioned Shell as a recognized world leader in human resource management. Brent's passion and expertise are focused on tackling complex organizational capability challenges and opportunities as they relate to humans at work. And he does that always, one experience at a time. Brent, it's a real honor and privilege to have you with us. Our global audience is eager to learn more from an industry and thought leader of your caliber.
Thank you, Jose. A great introduction as always. Always good to see you, and you do such a great job at these events. I'm very happy to be here. I've got about 35 minutes with you all, plus questions. Hope you're all safe. Hope you're taking breaks to stretch and watch your ergonomics as you sit in this conference all day, wherever you are. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the human condition at work, the future of human. What I have there is the bird called a crane, and the crane is the bird of prosperity, and that's what I think the future of work is. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about three things in the employee experience, and I always talk about the physical experience that employees have in the workplace, the technical experience that they have, and the cultural. All those three things work together, and a lot of the ideas that I come up with is how do those things work in harmony to build a better culture, a better worker experience. I will give you the Shell definitions and cautionary note. You don't have to read that. But all this is saying is anything I talk about here is really Brent's thought leadership as head of learning strategy at Shell. Doesn't impact the price of oil. Don't buy or sell Shell stock based on what I say. It's just one of those things we do. And I'm very pleased that Shell always affords me the opportunities to spread the good word that Shell's trying to do, not only within the company, but in the communities that we operate in, to really build a better human condition in all the assets that we work at and the communities that we work with. So with that said, I'm going to give you a few objectives for you, and these are the things that I want you to focus on as we go through this presentation. Things that you probably already know. Everybody on this call has work experience, and you're an expert at work. You know what you like, you know what you don't like, you know what frustrates you, you know what fatigues you, you know what motivates and inspires you and accelerates you. The other thing that we know, working in hazardous industries like Shell, is that disasters, as unfortunate as they have been, they've always informed our industry and helped us to become safer and more productive and better towards the humans that work with us. Three new things that you might not know when you come into this call is this whole idea of psychological safety and how important it's coming to organizations, especially as we've all been embedded in COVID and we've seen the exposition of what that kind of constraint does to workers. And we're now looking at work schemes like the traditional brick and mortar office, the virtual office, and now capabilities because of digital to make a hybrid work environment where people don't have to be on 24/7. They can be more mobile. They can defer work until a later time because they have all the resources in place to make that available. That's one of the things we want to do in Shell is make a very flexible and fluid workforce. Next thing we'll touch about is this era that we're in is high touch, so very integrated solutions and high concept solutions. And the last thing we'll talk about is Industry 4 is upon us now, but it's already created this drive to go to Industry 5.0. Now, we all have our story, and I like to use these two slides because they're very personal to me. The circle gentleman there is my great-grandfather. He worked in Allegheny Steel in Pittsburgh. And the pretty young lady on the right is my grandmother. When they work was all about toil and drudgery, and you know, it was something they had to do to put bread on the table. They didn't have the kind of experiences that we're afforded today. And again, we're going to that next level. I'm a bit of a historian, so the name's on the bottom of Lewis Hine, who is a very famous photojournalist that went into the Allegheny Steel that my grandfather worked, and he did one of the first organizational studies. He went to say, who are these people that work here? What are their families like? What do they eat? Where do they shop? What are their lives like? And they started to try to understand what the workforce was actually doing. So again, back to my point, we're all experts. We all have a history. You all probably have grandmothers and grandfathers that had jobs that they told you about and how work was for them. The next point that I wanted to tell you is hazards. And again, while I said they're tragic and terrible, they also provide information for our well-being. So if you look at each of these, like the Great Train Wreck of 1918, those cars that were in a head-on collision, they were wooden box cars. And that's what transformed industry to make steel box cars, because when the wooden box cars hit, they collapsed and they killed over 100 people in that particular incident. The children below, that was another picture that Lewis Hine took on the children working in the coal mines. And that day, in that picture, 2 of those young boys died the day Lewis Hine took that picture. Other things like the Triangle Fire that you see on the bottom right, that was one of the most significant incidents for workplace safety. Things about fire escapes and sprinklers and where they kept hazardous chemicals and material. So all of these kinds of things in the past helped to shape where we're at. Now, again, the last great employee experience trend, or the biggest thing since in the last 80 years, was for the Americans, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1939, when we got an 8-hour workday and they limited child labor. It's only been 80 years since we've done that. And so I see that right now with digitization and cyber physical connectivity, we're at the next great hope for the next level of employee experience at work. And what that means is that, we've been working on physical safety to make sure people don't get hurt at work. But now we're entering this era where psychological safety really matters. And you can tell I'm a historian. I love my historical art. Another etching, this was called The Miner Emerges, early 20th century. And psychological safety is a big thing right now, and especially in COVID. When we were going through COVID, people were very worried about their job security, trying to balance work and family life. And psychological safety breaks down into 4 major categories. It's you and your team members. Do you feel included in what's going on? Do you feel like you're getting communicated? Do you feel like you're getting information shared? Do you feel safe to learn? And what that means is being inquisitive. Do you feel you can ask questions? Do you feel you can seek out input? Do you feel you can contribute? Do you feel you can speak up? And most importantly, the highest level is, do you feel you can challenge? Do you feel you can say, hey, I don't think that's right? Early in my career, I did a lot of work on aircrew coordination with the military. And one of the big things there was you might have 6 or 7 operators in an aircraft, and because of rank, they didn't feel they could speak up. So if they saw something wrong, many times they didn't say anything. So the era of digital is now enabling us to create this kind of culture where people can feel more enabled. And I'll talk a little bit more about Shell and some of our solutions and how that helps people to address psychological safety. And this is one of the things that I hope organizations take advantage of. It's not just putting in digital solutions, it's putting in digital solutions that drive culture and it drives engagement. Just to tell you one more thing about psychological safety, and I won't go into this slide in too much detail, but when people come to work, they entrust us to go home safe. And that doesn't mean just without physical harm, it means without psychological harm. So we don't want people carrying back to their home life a bad work day in their exchanges throughout the office, throughout the site, okay? Because we know 40 years of research around long work hours and family conflict and job demand. The thing now is always being on. Again, one of the negative outcomes of digital connectivity is everybody feels like they're always on. These things drive workplace stress. Workplace stress drives unhealthy behaviors like alcoholism, drug abuse, overeating, and this results into things like hypertension, high blood pressure, all these kinds of things. And you might not know it, but if you talk about the things that relate to work, so hypertension, high blood pressure, etc., obesity, those are the 5 leading causes of death, at least in the United States. So if you track the 5 leading causes to death in the United States to potentially workplace sources, that's something that we as companies have to take ownership for and have to address. Embracing Industry 5.0. This is the meeting and the reconciliation of digital technologies, machine learning, and automation with humans. Again, the last 80 years, the years before that, industry always worked on productivity. What could we do to get people more productive? Now we're learning that people that are engaged are becoming more productive. And so the idea is this is why we want human experience to be the big driver of productivity and not the pushing of humans to be the driver of productivity. Okay. And again, I've shown this chart a lot. I hope it's familiar to many of you. As we've gone through these ages throughout the year, there's always been a catalyst to drive these things, whether it's a mechanical tool, whether it's electricity. And remember, each of these things drove an era of major change. So the light bulb, electricity, did many things for society. It enabled, for example, at Shell's first, and it's one of the United States' first 24/7 plant, was our Martinez refinery. When they had electricity, they could make the site go 24/7. That had impact on society with work shifts and things like that. So the computing age, that created what we now have as content shock. So we could replicate, duplicate information and content so fast that, we had those things, but it did a lot of things to all the things that people at work could do. Now we reach cyber physical connectivity. And what we learned about this is that just putting out digital solutions without intimate interface with the human is counterproductive. So if you put an iPad out there for people, but you don't think about how do they really use it on their job, and you don't put a strap on it or whatever, it doesn't get used, or it adds to their stress and doesn't distract from their stress. So it could be a productivity tool, but again, it puts more strain, more stress on the actual worker, because remember, people are overwhelmed, they're distracted, and they're becoming impatient because everything at work is competing for their time and their attention. So right now, Industry 5.0 is all about this human touch and adding it to the Industry 4.0. Okay. Now, the book that came out years and years ago was really negative, The Brave New World. If you know anything about that book, it talked about a society where machines and things took over. I say there's a new brave new world. And if you look at this chart I've got, when I started to use this chart just 2 years ago, we were really in technology, the hype cycle. Every new technology was coming up. Then we got into complexity. Every time we tried to do something and connect things, it was so complex. Then we moved up the chain around content shock. And then we had COVID, and now it's all about how did this whole new strain on society. And again, COVID's been one of the biggest social learning events in world history. everybody learned together. Everybody globally was in the same boat with the same constraints, and they all adapted or adjusted, to what they now do. And that's why we're seeing different things go on. And again, where we're at with, they want more control over their work environment. They want better types of connectivity with their peers, and they want a better integration with that work-life balance. So they've learned that in trying to integrate work and life and work at home, how challenging that is and what priorities pop up. So this is just another bit. I did talk to you about high touch, high concept, and it's a very simple slide. But what I'm saying here is we've got industry 4 capabilities of all these connected possibilities with artificial intelligence and analytics and indexing and tagging of content to make it adaptable and personalized. But then you've got the individual expectations. And remember, people want consumer grade expectations in their work life. They say, well, why can't I get an app like I've got on my personal life to do this in my organizational life? So if you think about what companies have been trying to do for experience, they've tried to do experience at a grand enterprise level. I see the era now with digital is taking, it's just not about a better interface to globally enterprise kind of task. It's going to the worker task, okay? And what is this high touch, high concept? So I did this slide, I was Christmas shopping, and everything that I was looking at wasn't what it was years ago. So a toothbrush is no longer just a toothbrush. A mirror is no longer just a mirror. So the mirror does A, B, C, and D. I bought a spotlight for my house. It wasn't just a spotlight. It showed temperature. Um, you could plug into it. It had 5 or 6 different functions. So it was taking one thing and adding more convenience around that thing. Same thing with high concept. So now we're learning that in this example here, this COVID mask isn't just a mask, it's a digital device. So again, these are the kind of solutions that we're buying in our personal life. If you go to Target or any store like that, you'll see the aisle that has all the things that tempt you before you go to the cash register, and they're all now multi-function, multi-purpose. So again, people want that reflected in their work life. They don't want to have to go to 6 different applications. They don't want to have to go to 6 different sources. They want things integrated in one source of the truth. So what I'm going to do now is shift and give you some practical examples from Shell. And these are things that we are actually putting in place. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about more of the human aspects around these items. This is a framework that I developed, and it was really about taking a look at the environmental nature. So if you looked at the connected human performer, there's 3 things. There's the environment that they're out there, and that's kind of the snow globe, okay? And you've got all of your sensors and your tags and your robots and your drones and all those things out there in the connected plant. And that's pulling data, it's aligning and connecting equipment. Then everything goes up to the cloud, and you've got the Shell worker, whether they have a earpiece or a wristwatch or they're carrying an iPad, they're out there fully connected and working. Now, we do that because the outcomes that we want on the far right are the things that are the flow of work. So in work, people get cues to start a job, unscheduled or scheduled. They have to make decisions. They might have to connect with an expert. They've got to solve problems and get data to solve problems. They've got to make the decisions and take action from those problems. We have to document what we've done. They want to give feedback and all those kinds of things. So we've been working, and again, this is an age where you have big agreements with big companies, for example, like a Microsoft or something, where you start to really converge on a portfolio to build what I call an experience ecosystem, okay, that's connected. So you can see the things that are like connected maintenance execution or remote assist or digital guides or a connected badge. And the thing I'm going to talk to you next is about one of my favorite things is the Shell DIY or do it yourself. And that's what I'll talk about next. So do it yourself is really about citizen development. And it's not just about citizen development, it's about creating a culture change. If you think about high reliability organizations, one of the key principles is to defer decisions to experts closest to the problems. So what we've done is we've enabled our operators to have access to do-it-yourself apps, etc. When they see a problem or have an idea, they can start to build it themselves and easy to develop and design solutions. If that solution takes root, it can be further developed by a third party or an intermediate part in Shell. But the idea is this empowers the people. It accelerates the time it takes to actually see and do things. So we're not bringing in big consultants and having a big project. Just in time need development. So they take ownership of it, it engages them, and they embrace it. So if you talk about change management, they become the change agents and the sponsors and the promoters of improvement, of innovation. So you're equipping that worker with the tools to be self-rising, to enable things that typically they would have had to go through organizational channels. And again, I told you it accelerates time and it allows them to take ownership of their work environment. They can see problems, they can have access to solutions. The next example is what we call Ready Operator One. It's really an environment-based experience where we use virtual reality to improve the skills of operators on their daily routines. And what we mean by that is really the personas. So personas are a big trend. We use those extensively in Shell to truly understand the what, where, when, how of an employee day in the life. So we want to find out and co-create those personas so that we really understand what do they struggle with? What do they see as things that are important but don't get done? It's those kind of things. And we try to make it a bit of a fun multiplayer or even single player game to do the work. So we want to keep them engaged. We want to do that. And again, the big things that works in Shell, because we always try to do the most critical needs or the most critical areas. Abnormal situation management, these are things that don't frequently occur. And so we want to reinforce the practice opportunities. We want to increase and the culture of chronic unease of finding and fixing small things and making sure that that's in the front of the mind of our workers and identifying these weak signals. So this is all about keeping our workers cognitively engaged in what could happen. Okay, so again, another enabler to performance that we want to put the worker at the heart of the issues, and we want to enable them to have solutions at the tip of their fingers and in their hands. The last one that I'm going to talk about is a concept that we come up a few years ago called Shell Docs, basically Shell documents. This started as our global procedures project, and to date we've digitized about 15,000 procedures across manufacturing, and they all go into a web-based tool that is also available on iPads or iPhones. But we didn't stop there. We wanted to create a kind of an ecosystem experience where you just didn't have the procedures, because remember, in a high-risk organization, procedures are the lifeblood. So that's where everything starts. And if you think about the employee experience, we want to touch their experience where they work, what they do. We want it to be individual. So with the content component management of this tool, we can tag and index content. So it's more than just digital content that's been put in a PDF and put on an iPad. This is dynamic data content that I can say, I'm Sarah, I work at the Deer Park refinery. I'm in the olefins unit. I'm on the third shift, and here's my specialty. And the content that's relevant to Sarah goes on. If Sarah's doing a procedure, she can click on the procedure. We can put an LFI next to it, maybe a learning from incident that happened in the past, to cue her memory, to make sure she's aware of a hazard or a caution. If she doesn't quite feel comfortable or confident in a step, there might be a video learning nugget next to that step. And so we're expanding it to make sure that that fingertip tool has everything that worker wants, and they can connect to an expert if they want as well, to get over the shoulder coaching or anything like that that they want to do. So we want it to be that one-stop shop that continually grows to support what the worker does. You know, all the tasks, the problems, the content they need, and the support that they need. So those are all great things, but the digital scope isn't easy. And this is the last slide that I'll talk to you about before we go to questions. And I use this slide quite a bit because I've always had, in everything in your life, whether you go see a play at the local theater, you go to a movie, everything has an arc of drama, and that holds very true in organizations. So nothing I've ever done in my transformational journeys in Shell hasn't included drama. Nothing good that we've done that has been hard to do is inherently easy. It's not the profile of transformation. Transformation comes with all kinds of challenges. So when you start out, you really have the hero of the play. Somebody that wants digital features or benefits, somebody that sees a problem, wants to innovate, wants to change from the status quo. However, you always have organizational antagonists. You have people that created the former solutions. You have a culture that isn't quite ready for that. You have people and processes with their preferences, their biases, and they're all trying to stop or block change because change is dark. It's a place that people can't see. There's no light in change, and people fear the darkness. So what you're trying to do is get people to believe in a better tomorrow. So in doing that, you're going to have rising action. People are going to see the problems. You know, for example, when we did global implementation of VR, we didn't know anything about cloud pricing. So when the vendor came to us and said, okay, you want to turn it on, here's another bill for turning it on in the cloud. I said, wait a minute, I just paid you, $1 million for the VR modules. You mean I wasn't finished? Big learning, a big climax that created high tension that I had to go to my stakeholder and say, that budget you gave me, I actually need more, because honestly, I didn't know that we were going to have additional fees. So it was a big learning, something that's commonplace now. It was an organizational learning. We got over it. And then we had falling action. And from that, we learned a lot and actually got greater improvements. Everything was resolved. The modules that we actually developed were highly acclaimed by our end users. They were award winning on the external market, and they were a best practice for industry on how Shell did this. Now, that didn't come with not a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and struggles, and even people wanted to give up halfway through. So that big blue arc in the middle of that conflict, and I say middles are messy. So when you get into the middle of something, the scope between it starting as an idea, as a concept, to actually ending, and a new status quo forms, is a really kind of it's not for the faint of heart. So anyways, I think we're a bit at time, so I'm going to stop there and just turn it back over to Jose, and thank you all for your time.
That's fantastic, Brent. What a journey you have been on, and what interesting insights of this view and vision of Industry 5.0. So Brent, I'm gonna come back in with my camera, so I'm gonna ask you to stop showing your presentation screen to the audience at this point. terrific. And here we are. And I have the first question is on the journey itself. You know, the future is human. Is a great description of a new era where most people are thinking, well, you know, thinking about the robots are taking over, and we're talking about the future being human. And how has been this journey in turn, and how have you communicated these messages to employees? Is this something that has started pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and then, you know, how has that communication taken place?
Well, I think it's been several years on a digital journey. So before COVID hit, we were heavy into that, and people had the idea of the peopleless plant, right? They were going to have automation is going to be all over the place. You're going to run a plant with a button in Asia, you know, those kinds of things. That's really not happening. What will happen is, you know, there's a story about a man and the dog, and Warren Bennis, the famous management leader, coined it, and it basically said in the future, organizations will be run by a dog, basically, that watches everything, and a man that feeds the dog and makes sure the man doesn't touch any instrument or any part of the plant. Well, that's not really holding true, because what we're finding is the more you automate, the more you have to humanate, because those things that automation is great at, people are terrible at, and those things that humans are great at, automation is terrible at. So what we're finding is in the social skills and in the intellectual skills, that's where humans are going to see an entirely new set of skills that we haven't even tapped on. So that 8 hours or 6 hours a day you might have spent collating data, now it's going to be done for you. So instead of running around chasing people trying to sort data, it's going to be to you. So now you're going to spend time thinking about that data, what it means, and connecting with other people to see what they think it means. So we're seeing a shift, and we're trying to get people's mind that the matrix organizations that we work with, and this is what's happening, and I'll give you a real life example. We automated the shift handover process at our manufacturing site in Norco, and we used OneNote. And before, a shift lead would have to get everybody together, stay an extra 15 minutes at the plant, and read a paper and said, well, this happened last night or that happened. Everybody talk about it. Now they're on the iPads. That person doesn't have to be there, so they don't have to be the overtime. They can leave. And everybody's seeing exactly what happened, and they can read it on their iPads. And what they're seeing is other operating units can also see what happened, and they can engage in discussion. They can say, I never read the olefins report before, but now I have an opportunity because it's been made accessible to me. And so that's allowing people to collaborate and collectively think. Same thing with our digital procedures. When we put digital procedures in place, an operator could put in notes. Before, a note was just shared verbally, but now that it's in a documented system, people actually look at it and see, was it taken action on or not? So people are being more engaged to say, my voice is being heard. So it's these kinds of things that if you do digital right, you humanate the people so that they become broader thinkers and then more creative thinkers, and they take a more holistic view of the things that can potentially impact their areas of operation.
That's fantastic. Was some great examples there, Brent. And Brent, as we're moving into this industry 5.0, what, you know, you're leading learning development for the organization, and what are the skill building kind of capabilities that you're working on? What are the needed skills for employees in this transition?
Well, one of the things that is important as we go to these more hybrid working models, managers have to be more empathy based. So that's a new skill set. So if you think about COVID, you know, the old view was, well, if I don't see you working, you're not working. And we've learned through COVID that actually people overwork oftentimes and they get fatigued and burnt out. So the new manager of the future has to be able to help employees balance, okay? The other thing that we're seeing are in the learning skills. So people have to be much more open to sharing knowledge. So digital platforms where knowledge used to be power, now with things like net promoter scores on the social work media, people get credit and recognized for what they know and more importantly, what they share. So everybody loves Bill's content contributions. He gets 5 stars and he's one of the greatest, content contributors in the, chemical process in Shell. So it's also things about cooperative and collaborative learning. So a lot of times people didn't collectively learn or because they couldn't see the 4 disciplines that were involved in a process. Now we can connect them. And they collaborate. Now, cooperative learning as well is a new thing. So it's those things that build that learner mindset and teach and enable people to be more fluid in their own development. And the last thing is, again, with these apps and all we're doing is we're trying to create a culture where people believe in the tasks that they're doing, that they have the confidence to do them. They feel that the actual task is really worthwhile doing, and they're seeing the benefit of their work on the organization rather than in the past. They don't know what happened to the effort that they displayed.
That's a great insights there, Brent. I have I'm gonna mention something, then I'll follow up that with a question. Is that we have found that in this organizations that are moving to the next level, which you're calling Industry 5.0, but really, if you look at organizations who are multi-million-dollar organizations or become multi-billion-dollar organizations, and more important, when you go from that step from multi-billion to maybe a multi-trillion-dollar organization, there are a couple of skill sets that differentiate those multi-trillion-dollar organizations from the rest. And they are very specific innovation execution skills and then collaborative leadership skills, which is something I want to focus on with you. We actually work with those organizations accelerating excellence innovation and developing more collaborative leaders. And the understanding of collaborative leadership is not very well known because people sometimes think that collaborative leadership is about consensus building, and it's not that. We'll say that great collaborative leadership requires you to surround yourself with people of diverse perspectives who can disagree with you without fear of retaliation. And I saw you talking about that in your presentation about this, and you frame it under kind of a psychological safety. Tell me a little bit more about this migration now into this. You're working a hardcore industry of oil and gas, hard working people on operations, and now you're migrating to collaborative leadership, psychological safety. How do you get the really the vulnerability and the openness for people to have the discussion around these topics?
Right. So that's a great question. I'd say in the new millennium, this new era, silence, in my belief, is the greatest destroyer of organizations. And that's because organizations are becoming more complex inherently. There's more systems, more connectivity, all the things that they can do because of connectivity. And if people don't speak up or you don't create a culture where people can speak up, that will create a tremendous amount of what the military calls friction. And what you'll see is every decision, just like quality management, if you have an unspoken option or possibility that could have been said this stage of the process, and it doesn't get said, and the further up you go in development or design, the bigger that voice, the silence of that voice becomes. And so what you've got to do is, and one of the things that I'm trying to get through to Shell or get with Shell is this digital space can make the silence go away to some degree because you put everyone on a democratized playing field. So digitally, people's voice can weigh in just as much as another's voice, okay? And if you take it out of those small cubic rooms and those small things where there's 4 people in it, and you put it more of a, it's a funny thing, you know, anything like in social media, if you put it out there, people can like it or not like it, but you get the discussion going. And at the end of the day, typically that resonates into a good analysis. So that's the one of the things you want to do is get the ideas on table, but have platforms that accelerate the kind of the machining of that idea. You know, the maturing of it. So that's what you really want to do is you want to have a more mature system that people feel free to speak up. And again, I do worry that, you know, economies and organization culture, you know, we've got to eliminate the fear in all these organizations that exist because, you know, innovation is all about the next idea that wasn't there. And again, I tell you, people are afraid of the shadowy dark. You know, if you think about history, you know, scary movies, everybody's scared of the dark room with the closet, you know, and that's what innovation is. It's something sitting in a dark room in a closet, and you've got to turn the lights on and open the door. So, you know, that's where I see it, and that's the culture shift is that to get people not so afraid of the dark.
That is a real challenge and opportunity for all organizations, and well captured. William Fuller has a question for you related to the arc of drama. I love that. The arc of drama.
I've been
We all
living
have
in it for
experience.
20 plus years.
Yeah, we all have experienced that arc. And so his question is that how do you mitigate some of that? You know, what kind of change management approaches can you employ early on the to I think that we all have to go through some version of the arc of drama. I guess how can we minimize the drama on that arc? Is there some tips on change management for that?
Yeah, I'll give you the one thing that has always been the most successful to me. I find I do a little bit of historical research typically on the solution, whatever it might be. And a great mentor of mine years ago told me, he goes, Brent, in the organization, if you find something weird and doesn't make sense and seems odd, it's because at the time it was done for a reason. And you've got to go back and find that reason because it's probably all changed and it's just become entrenched. And so I've always gone back to look at how things were done, what were the conditions under which they were done, and what's changed. And so when I found that out, you know, it always tells me, well, you know, at the time, well, we had XXY systems and they could only do ABC. You know, I found out before, like we did a global quality management, we had all these data quality errors, and it was simply because in our massive system, we would capture 200 items on an employee. Well, we had 7 people inputting data, and if they didn't have the data, they just punch, and they wouldn't fill in the data. They put XXX, and it created 5 data quality errors. And we were creating a million data quality errors because, you know, that was the way people in the system didn't know what to do. But the other thing that I did is I always found the most gristly, confrontational person in the process that was dead set against the change. And I'd always make them my closest person so I'd understand why are they so antagonistic about this? What's behind this? And if I could find those things out and get those people on board, they became my greatest allies. Because what I did, and it's, again, it goes to the 80-20. If I could find the 20% of the people that were giving the change journey 80% of its grief, that's who I worked on. I didn't work on the 80% of the people that were, you know, not irrelevant, but you know, indifferent about the change. So I went to the people that were most adamant about the change. And typically I found out it was because of individual personal preference. It was, you know, they didn't want to talk to an HR manager in Singapore. They wanted to have their manager at their office, or they wanted, you know, they liked, they were part of developing the old system, or, you know, they liked that they could travel more because, you know, the way it was and those kind of things. Or they got to do consulting internal hours because, you know, they could go to sites and present, you know, 4 times a month, you know, those kind of things.
Very well. Well, tremendous wisdom there. We're in an era of, especially in the energy industry, of accelerated innovations, energy transitions, and there is a lot to be scared about. But we all know that we have to be excited about the new opportunities that are emerging. And you're such a great spokesperson for that excitement, for that vision, and it's always a pleasure to listen and learn from you. And on behalf of our global audience, I have to say, the deepest and sincere gratitude for taking your time to share your expertise with us.
Thanks, Jose. Always love spending an hour plus with you. So it's always rewarding to me. So thank you for all you do and keeping this program going. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brent. Brent Kedzierski, ladies and gentlemen, the head of learning strategy and innovation at Shell. Thank you very much, Brent, again, for sharing your expertise with us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to set up our next session. At the top of the hour, we're going to wrap up today's sessions and the conference with a great thought and industry leader from DIGO. DIGO is a British multinational beverage company with its headquarters in London. It operates more than 180 countries, produces more than 140 sites around the world. It was one of the world's largest distillers, and with nearly 28,000 employees. And we're gonna learn from Bobby Sudarshan how they are creating a native EA integration strategy with modern day multi-cloud environments for agility and adaptability. So there will be strategy in there, there will be very tactical execution, and we're going to wrap up again with another great practitioner of enterprise architecture. So we're going to wrap up for now. I'll see you back at the top of the hour.